The courtroom was quiet except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It wasn't a grand hall like the ones you'd see in movies. No towering pillars or dramatic statues of Lady Justice holding her scales. But it still carried an air of importance. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a mix that always made people feel both nervous and serious at the same time. On one side sat Carl Jensen, the lead prosecutor, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, and his confident smile radiating authority. Across from him stood Pam Bondi, who looked anything but intimidating. Pam was young, probably no older than 30, with dark hair tied neatly into a bun and glasses perched on her nose. She didn't wear designer clothes or carry a fancy leather briefcase. Instead, she had a simple folder tucked under her arm, its edges worn from use. Her presence seemed almost out of place in this high-stakes legal battle, but there she was, standing tall despite the weight of everyone's skeptical eyes on her. Judge John Roberts entered the room then, his robe swishing behind him as he took his seat at the bench. He was known throughout the legal community for being sharp-tongued and unyielding, qualities that often left attorneys trembling before him. Today, however, something about Pam caught his attention, not because she impressed him, but because she annoyed him. There was something about her calm demeanor that rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was how she didn't fidget when he glared at her, or maybe it was just the fact that someone so inexperienced dared to step foot in his courtroom. "Ms. Bondi," Judge Roberts said, leaning forward slightly as if trying to intimidate her already, "I understand you're filling in for Mr. Harper?" "Yes, Your Honor," Pam replied, her voice steady. "He fell ill unexpectedly, and I've been asked to take over the case." Roberts raised an eyebrow. "Take over? A case of this magnitude? Do you even have any relevant experience?" Pam hesitated for only a second before answering. "I may not have handled a case exactly like this before, but I've studied extensively, and I'm prepared to represent my client to the best of my ability." Carl Jensen smirked from across the aisle, clearly enjoying the spectacle. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if he were watching a train wreck unfold. Everyone knew who Pam was, or rather, who she wasn't. She didn't come from a prestigious law school or a big-name firm. She hadn't clerked for a federal judge or argued cases in front of panels of seasoned veterans. No, Pam Bondi was just a small-town lawyer who somehow found herself in the middle of one of the biggest corporate corruption trials in recent memory. "Well," Roberts said dryly, "we'll see how far your extensive study gets you here. This isn't some classroom exercise. Lives are at stake. Reputations hang in the balance, and billions of dollars could change hands depending on what happens in this room." "I understand the gravity of the situation, Your Honor," Pam said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "and I assure you I won't let my client down." Roberts chuckled softly, though there was no warmth in it. "We'll see about that." The hearing began, and it quickly became clear why everyone thought Pam was out of her depth. Carl Jensen launched into his opening statement with practiced ease, painting a picture of greed and deception that implicated Pam's client, a mid-sized tech company accused of falsifying financial records. His words flowed smoothly, each sentence punctuated by dramatic pauses for effect. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing more somber with every accusation. When it was Pam's turn to speak, the contrast couldn't have been starker. Where Jensen was flashy and theatrical, Pam was measured and methodical. She started by acknowledging the seriousness of the charges against her client, which immediately disarmed some of the hostility in the room. Then she began laying out her defense strategy, explaining how the prosecution's narrative overlooked key details and relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. But Judge Roberts wasn't interested in giving her a fair chance to shine. "Every few minutes," he interrupted her with pointed questions designed to trip her up. "Ms. Bondi, can you explain the significance of the 2018 ruling in State v. Anderson?" he asked during one such interruption. "How does it apply to this case?" Pam paused, flipping through her notes briefly before responding. "That ruling established that companies cannot be held liable for fraudulent activities, unless direct intent can be proven. In this instance, the prosecution has yet to provide conclusive evidence of intent." Roberts frowned, clearly expecting her to stumble. Instead, she continued, elaborating on how the precedent supported her argument. For a moment, the courtroom fell silent. Even Carl Jensen stopped smirking, his brow furrowing as he realized Pam wasn't going to fold under pressure. Still, Roberts wasn't ready to concede anything. If anything, Pam's composure only fueled his determination to break her. Very well, he said curtly. Let's move on to the next matter. As the day wore on, Pam faced wave after wave of challenges. The prosecution presented witness after witness, each one recounting tales of suspicious transactions and questionable business practices. Pam countered by highlighting inconsistencies in their testimonies, pointing out gaps in logic that weakened the prosecution's case. Yet every time she gained ground, Roberts found a way to undermine her efforts, whether by dismissing her objections or cutting her off mid-sentence. By the end of the session, Pam felt drained but resolute. She gathered her things quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone as she exited the courtroom. Outside, Laura Bennett, her closest friend and confidant, waited for her. Laura worked as a paralegal at Pam's firm and had insisted on coming along for moral support. "How did it go?" Laura asked, concern etched on her face. "It could have been worse," Pam admitted, forcing a small smile. "I think I held my own, but Judge Roberts, he's relentless." Laura nodded sympathetically. "He's notorious for being tough. Don't let him get to you. You're smarter than he gives you credit for." "I hope you're right," Pam murmured, "because if I don't figure out how to win this thing, my client's reputation, and possibly their entire company, is on the line." They walked together toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. As they drove away, Pam couldn't shake the feeling that this trial was going to test her in ways she'd never imagined. She knew she was good, at least she believed she was, but proving it to others, especially someone like Judge Roberts, was another story entirely. Back home, Pam spent hours poring over documents, searching for anything that might strengthen her case. She barely noticed the passage of time as she highlighted passages, scribbled notes in the margins, and cross-referenced statutes. Her mind raced with possibilities, each new discovery fueling her resolve. Whatever happened next, she vowed to fight with everything she had. Little did she know, her perseverance was about to pay off in ways she couldn't yet imagine. And while Judge Roberts might have seen her as nothing more than an inexperienced annoyance now, he would soon come to realize just how wrong he was. The next morning, Pam arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. She carried 2 cups of coffee, one for herself and one for Laura, who had promised to help her go over the prosecution's evidence again. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the city streets. Despite the early hour, Pam felt wide awake, her mind buzzing with thoughts about the trial ahead. As they sat together in a small conference room near the courtroom, Laura flipped through stacks of documents while Pam typed furiously on her laptop. "You know," Laura said after a long silence, "you're handling all this pressure really well. I'd be a wreck if I were in your shoes." Pam smiled faintly but didn't look up from her screen. "I don't have time to fall apart, Laura. If I do, my client loses everything. And honestly, that's not going to happen." Her determination was admirable, but it didn't stop Judge Roberts from continuing his campaign to rattle her. When the hearing resumed later that day, he wasted no time picking apart every argument Pam made. He interrupted her constantly, questioning her logic and even mocking her phrasing when she stumbled over a particularly tricky legal term. Each jab seemed calculated to make her doubt herself, but Pam refused to let him see her crack. At one point, Roberts leaned forward in his chair, his piercing eyes fixed on her. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "do you truly believe you're equipped to handle a case of this complexity? Or are you simply here because no one else could step in?" Pam took a deep breath before responding. "Your Honor, I understand your concerns, but I assure you I've done nothing but prepare for this trial since taking over the case. My qualifications may not come from a fancy law school or a big-name firm, but they're real nonetheless." Roberts raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Real enough to stand against Mr. Jensen and his team, because so far I haven't seen much to suggest you can. Carl Jensen smirked from his seat, clearly enjoying the spectacle. He exchanged a glance with one of his associates, who stifled a laugh behind his hand. The jury watched silently, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, Pam felt the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on her. But then she remembered why she was there. To fight for justice, not to win anyone's approval. "I'll prove myself through my work, Your Honor," she said firmly. "Not through arguments about my background." Robert sighed theatrically, as if disappointed by her response. "Very well. Proceed." Despite the constant interruptions, Pam managed to present her case effectively. She methodically dismantled the prosecution's narrative, pointing out inconsistencies in witness testimonies and highlighting flaws in their evidence. Every time Roberts tried to derail her, she calmly redirected the conversation back to the facts. Her composure began to unnerve him, though he wouldn't admit it aloud. Meanwhile, Carl Jensen grew increasingly frustrated. He had expected Pam to crumble under pressure, leaving the defense in shambles. Instead, she was holding her ground, and worse, she was starting to gain traction. During one cross-examination, Pam caught one of Jensen's key witnesses in a lie. The man, a former employee of the defendant company, had claimed to have first-hand knowledge of illegal activities, but when Pam pressed him for specifics, his answers became vague and contradictory. "Mr. Lewis," Pam said, her voice steady, "you stated earlier that you personally witnessed these alleged fraudulent transactions. Yet now you seem unsure of the dates, amounts, and even the names of the individuals involved. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Lewis shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing nervously at Jensen. Maybe I misremembered some details," he stammered. "So, you're admitting that parts of your testimony might not be accurate?" Pam pressed. "Well, I guess so," Lewis muttered, looking defeated. Jensen jumped to his feet, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is unfair. Ms. Bondi is deliberately badgering the witness." Judge Roberts hesitated, torn between reprimanding Pam and acknowledging that her questions were valid. Finally, he waved a hand dismissively. "Objection overruled. Continue, Ms. Bondi." Pam nodded and turned back to Lewis. "Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Just one more question. Did anyone instruct you on what to say during your testimony?" "No," Lewis exclaimed quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Nobody told me what to say. Then, how do you explain the emails we found between you and Mr. Jensen's office?" Pam asked, pulling up a document on the courtroom monitor. It showed a series of messages outlining exactly what Lewis should claim during his testimony. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the jury leaned forward, their interest piqued. Jensen's face turned red with anger. "This is outrageous. Those emails were taken out of context, were they?" Pam countered coolly. "Because they seem pretty clear to me." For the first time, Judge Roberts looked genuinely intrigued. He studied the emails carefully, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he addressed Jensen. "Mr. Jensen, care to explain these communications?" Jensen sputtered, struggling to come up with a plausible excuse. "They're harmless exchanges, nothing more than routine preparation." "Routine preparation doesn't involve scripting a witness's testimony word for word," Pam interjected. "Unless, of course, the goal is to manipulate the truth." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, forcing Roberts to bang his gavel for order. "Enough," he barked. "We'll deal with this later. Move on, Ms. Bondi." As Pam returned to her seat, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. For the first time, she sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The jury was paying closer attention, jotting down notes and exchanging thoughtful glances. Even Roberts seemed less eager to dismiss her arguments outright. Outside the courtroom during a recess, Laura greeted Pam with a grin. "That was incredible. You totally called him out." "It's not over yet," Pam replied, though she couldn't hide her own excitement. "But yeah, it felt good to score a point." Later that afternoon, tensions reached a boiling point. Jensen, desperate to regain control, filed a motion to exclude a crucial piece of evidence Pam planned to introduce. a financial report showing discrepancies in the company's accounts. Roberts listened intently as both sides argued their positions, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Your Honor," Pam said, addressing the judge directly, "this report is central to our defense. Without it, the prosecution's case remains incomplete. And without proper authentication, it's inadmissible," Jensen countered sharply. "She hasn't provided any credible source for this document." Roberts tapped his pen against the bench, considering the arguments. Finally, he spoke. "Motion granted. The report will not be admitted as evidence." Pam clenched her fists beneath the table, fighting to keep her frustration in check. This was a major setback, one that could jeopardize her entire strategy. But she knew better than to argue further. Instead, she nodded politely and thanked the judge for his ruling. Back in the conference room after the day's proceedings ended, Pam vented her frustrations to Laura. "He's doing everything he can to block me," she said bitterly. "Every time I try to introduce something that helps my case, he shuts it down." Laura placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Everything you're doing is still making an impact. The jury sees how hard you're fighting. They're watching. Trust me," Pam sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I hope you're right. Because if I don't find another way to prove my client's innocence—" "You will," Laura interrupted firmly. "You always do. Remember why you started this journey. You didn't get into law to play games, you got into it to make a difference." Her words struck a chord with Pam, reminding her of the countless late nights spent studying, the sacrifices she'd made to pursue her dream, and the belief that justice should prevail no matter the odds. With renewed determination, Pam opened her laptop and dove back into the evidence, determined to uncover something, anything that could turn the tide. Unbeknownst to her, Judge Roberts was also reflecting on the day's events. As he reviewed the transcripts in his chambers, he found himself reluctantly impressed by Pam's tenacity. She wasn't just surviving in his courtroom, she was thriving, despite every obstacle thrown her way. For the first time, he wondered if he had misjudged her capabilities or underestimated her potential. Little did either of them know, the most explosive revelations were yet to come, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning of the third day of the trial dawned gray and overcast, matching the mood inside the courthouse. Pam Bondi arrived early, carrying a stack of documents she had organized late into the night. She felt the weight of the case pressing down on her, but there was no time for doubt. Every hour mattered, every detail counted, and she knew she couldn't afford to lose focus. Laura met her outside the courtroom, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you haven't slept," Laura said, handing 1 cup to Pam. "I didn't," Pam admitted, taking a sip. "But I found something last night, something big." Laura's eyes widened. "What is it?" Pam hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's buried deep in the prosecution's files, a document that ties the defendant company to illegal offshore activities. Not just fraud, but money laundering and bribes to foreign officials. If I can get this admitted as evidence, it could change everything." Laura's jaw dropped. "That's huge. Why didn't they mention it before?" "They buried it," Pam explained. "Buried it so well that even their own witnesses probably don't know about it. It's complicated, technical stuff, hidden among thousands of pages, but it's real and it's damning." "Do you think Judge Roberts will let you use it?" Laura asked cautiously. Pam exhaled slowly. "I don't know. He's been ruling against me at every turn. But I have to try. This could be our only chance." Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Carl Jensen looked smug as he took his seat, clearly confident that he had regained the upper hand after excluding Pam's financial report. The jury sat quietly, their expressions neutral but attentive. And Judge Roberts, as always, presided, with an air of authority, his sharp eyes scanning the room. When the session began, Pam stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce new evidence discovered during my review of the prosecution's disclosures. It directly implicates the defendant company in criminal activities beyond the scope of this trial." Roberts frowned, leaning forward slightly. "New evidence? At this stage? Ms. Bondi, you're aware that such requests are highly irregular. I understand, Your Honor, Pam replied calmly. However, this information was deliberately concealed within the prosecution's own filings. Its relevance cannot be ignored. Jensen shot to his feet, his face red with indignation. This is absurd. There's no credible basis for these claims. She's grasping at straws. Let her speak, Roberts said curtly, silencing Jensen, with a wave of his hand. Proceed, Ms. Bondi. Pam walked to the front of the courtroom and placed several printed pages on the witness stand. These documents outline transactions between the defendant company and shell corporations registered. In countries known for lax financial regulations, they show large sums of money being funneled out of the country without proper documentation or legal justification. Robert studied the papers carefully, his expression unreadable. And how do you propose to authenticate these documents? They were submitted by the prosecution themselves, Pam explained. They're part of the discovery materials provided under court order. Their authenticity has already been verified through standard procedures, Jensen interjected again. Even if these documents exist, they have nothing to do with the charges at hand. This is a distraction tactic. On the contrary, Pam countered smoothly, they prove intent. The prosecution claims my client falsified records due to negligence or incompetence. But these transactions demonstrate a deliberate effort to evade accountability, not just domestically, but internationally. For a moment, the courtroom fell silent. Everyone watched as Judge Roberts flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke. Given the circumstances, I'll allow limited questioning regarding these documents. However, Ms. Bondi, tread carefully. If this turns out to be irrelevant, I won't hesitate to sanction you. Thank you, Your Honor, Pam said, relief evident in her voice. The rest of the day unfolded with Pam presenting her findings to the jury. She connected the dots meticulously, explaining how the defendant company used fake invoices and dummy accounts to mask illicit activities. Each revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, leaving the prosecution scrambling to respond. Carl Jensen tried to downplay the significance of the evidence, arguing that it was circumstantial and unrelated to the case. But Pam anticipated his objections, countering with precise legal arguments that left him flustered. By the end of the session, even the most skeptical jurors seemed intrigued. As the hearing adjourned, Judge Roberts called Pam to his chambers. It was an unusual move, one that made her nervous. She entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Ms. Bondi, Roberts began, gesturing for her to sit. I must admit I underestimated you. Your handling of today's proceedings was impressive. Pam blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm simply doing my job. Roberts nodded thoughtfully. Still, I need to ask, how did you find these documents? They were buried so deeply that even experienced attorneys might have missed them. Pam hesitated before answering. I spent hours combing through every page of the prosecution's filings. It wasn't easy, but I knew there had to be something more, something they didn't want us to see. Roberts leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. Determination like yours is rare. Many lawyers would have given up long ago. You've shown remarkable skill and integrity. Though his words were unexpected, Pam remained composed. I appreciate your kind remarks, Your Honor. But my focus remains on proving my client's innocence. Robert smiled faintly. Of course. Just know that your efforts haven't gone unnoticed. Back in the hallway, Pam shared the news with Laura, who listened in awe. He actually praised you, that's incredible. It doesn't change anything, Pam reminded her. We still have a long way to go. But maybe, just maybe, he's starting to see things differently. Over the next few days, the trial continued with renewed intensity. Pam built on the momentum from her discovery, presenting additional evidence that further undermined the prosecution's case. Witnesses called by Jensen became increasingly defensive, their testimonies unraveling under Pam's careful cross-examinations. One particularly dramatic moment came when Pam questioned a senior executive from the defendant company. The man, dressed in a tailored suit, exuded arrogance as he took the stand. But Pam quickly dismantled his facade, exposing contradictions in his statements and forcing him to admit knowledge of questionable practices. "You claim you weren't aware of these offshore accounts?" Pam asked, her tone deceptively calm. "Yet emails show you personally authorized transfers amounting to millions of dollars. How do you explain that?" The executive shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I may have signed some documents, but I trusted my team to handle the details." "So you're saying you knowingly approved illegal transactions without understanding their purpose?" Pam pressed. "No, that's not what I meant," the man stammered, visibly panicked. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, forcing Roberts to bang his gavel for order. "Enough," he declared firmly. "The jury has heard enough." By the end of the week, the tide had turned decisively in Pam's favor. The prosecution's once airtight case now appeared riddled with holes, thanks to her relentless pursuit of the truth. Even Judge Roberts seemed less inclined to challenge her arguments, instead allowing her the leeway she needed to present her case effectively. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered eagerly, hoping to catch glimpses of the unfolding drama. Pam avoided their questions, keeping her focus squarely on the trial. But she couldn't ignore the growing sense of hope swelling within her. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that victory might be within reach. Little did she know the final chapters of this story were yet to unfold, and they would test her resolve in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The courtroom was alive with tension as the trial entered its final stages. Pam Bondi stood at the center of it all, her calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions brewing inside her. The days had been long and grueling, but she could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. Still, she knew better than to celebrate too soon. One misstep, one wrong word, and everything she had worked for could come crashing down. Carl Jensen, on the other hand, was visibly unraveling. His once confident smile had faded into a tight-lipped scowl, and his sharp suits no longer seemed to command the same authority they once did. He paced back and forth near the prosecution's table, whispering urgently to his team. They were desperate, throwing out accusations and filing last-minute motions in an attempt to regain control, but their efforts only made them look more frantic and less credible. Judge Roberts watched the chaos unfold with a mix of irritation and intrigue. He had always prided himself on maintaining order in his courtroom, yet here he was presiding over what felt like a battle of wills. On one side was Jensen flailing under pressure, on the other was Pam standing firm despite every obstacle thrown her way. Roberts couldn't help but admire her composure, even if he wouldn't admit it aloud. As the day began, Jensen launched a bold attack. "Your Honor," he said, rising dramatically to his feet, "I must object to Ms. Bondi's tactics. She has deliberately misled this court by introducing fabricated evidence." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to Pam, waiting for her response. Her expression remained calm, almost serene, as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I assure you that all evidence presented has been thoroughly vetted and authenticated. If Mr. Jensen believes otherwise, perhaps he should explain why such critical documents were included in his own filings." Roberts tapped his pen against the bench, clearly unimpressed by Jensen's accusation. "Mr. Jensen, are you suggesting that your own team submitted false information? Because if so, that would be quite the admission." Jensen sputtered, caught off guard. "No, of course not. I'm saying she manipulated those documents to fit her narrative." "Then prove it," Roberts said sharply. "Until you can provide concrete evidence to support your claim, I'll consider this matter closed." Pam suppressed a small smile as Jensen sat down, defeated. It was another victory, albeit a small one, but every win brought her closer to her goal. She glanced at the jury, who were watching the exchange with growing skepticism toward the prosecution. Their expressions told her everything she needed to know. They weren't buying Jensen's theatrics anymore. Later that afternoon, Pam called her final witness, Laura Bennett. Though Laura wasn't directly involved in the case, her expertise as a paralegal made her invaluable in explaining complex financial records. As Laura took the stand, Pam guided her through a series of questions designed to clarify the prosecution's inconsistencies. "Ms. Bennett," Pam began, "you've reviewed the financial documents provided by both parties. Can you tell us what you found?" Laura nodded confidently. "Yes. While examining the records, I noticed several discrepancies. For example, certain transactions listed in the defendant's official reports don't match the actual bank statements. Additionally, there are payments marked as consulting fees that lack any supporting documentation." Jensen objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is hearsay. She's not qualified to analyze these documents," Pam countered quickly. "Ms. Bennett has years of experience working with financial records. Her insights are based on factual observations, not speculation." Roberts considered the argument before ruling. "Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Bondi." With each question, Pam painted a clearer picture of deception. Laura's testimony reinforced the idea that the defendant company had engaged in deliberate misconduct, using convoluted accounting practices to hide their tracks. By the time Laura stepped down, the jury looked more convinced than ever that something sinister was at play. But just when it seemed like Pam had secured her position, disaster struck. During a recess, a member of the prosecution's team approached Judge Roberts with urgent news. A whistleblower had come forward, claiming that Pam had forged some of the key documents used in her defense. The allegation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, forcing Roberts to call an emergency hearing. "Ms. Bondi," Roberts said gravely, "these are serious charges. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Pam felt her heart sink, but she refused to let panic take over. "Your Honor, I categorically deny these allegations. Every document I presented came directly from the prosecution's disclosures. If there's any doubt about their authenticity, I welcome an independent investigation." Roberts nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. We'll adjourn for today while we verify these claims. Court is dismissed." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Pam, shouting questions about the whistleblower's accusations. She ignored them, focusing instead on reassuring Laura. "It's going to be okay," Pam said firmly. "They're trying to intimidate us, but we have nothing to hide." Back at her office, Pam spent hours reviewing every piece of evidence, double-checking sources, and preparing for the worst. Sleep eluded her as she wrestled with doubts. What if someone had tampered with the files? What if the prosecution planted false information to discredit her? The possibilities swirled in her mind, threatening to overwhelm her. The next morning, Judge Roberts announced the results of the investigation. "After thorough examination," he said, addressing the courtroom, "there is no evidence to support the claim that Ms. Bondi forged any documents. The allegations appear to be baseless." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Pam allowed herself a brief moment of gratitude before turning her attention back to the trial. With the distraction behind her, she delivered her closing statement, a powerful summary of her case that left no room for ambiguity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Pam began, her voice steady and clear, "this trial isn't just about numbers or corporate policies. It's about truth versus lies, integrity versus corruption. My client stands accused of wrongdoing, yet the evidence shows that the real culprits are those who sought to exploit loopholes and evade responsibility." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You've heard from witnesses, examined documents, and seen the inconsistencies in the prosecution's arguments. Now it's up to you to decide where justice truly lies." When she finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. Even Carl Jensen seemed subdued, realizing that his chances of winning were slipping away. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Pam felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of her hands. Judge Roberts watched her closely as she returned to her seat. There was a flicker of admiration in his eyes, though his expression remained stern. "Well argued, Ms. Bondi," he murmured quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied softly, feeling a sense of validation she hadn't expected. Hours passed as the jury deliberated, their discussions hidden behind closed doors. When they finally returned, the tension in the room was unbearable. The foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Roberts. He read it silently, then nodded. The jury has reached a unanimous decision, Roberts announced. On all counts, the defendant is found not guilty. The courtroom erupted into cheers, though Pam remained seated, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Laura rushed to hug her, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she exclaimed. "You actually did it." Pam smiled faintly, still processing the enormity of what had happened. She glanced at Judge Roberts, who gave her a subtle nod of approval. In that moment, she realized that the trial wasn't just about proving her client's innocence. It was about proving herself, not only to others but also to herself. As the crowd dispersed, Roberts lingered in the courtroom, watching Pam pack up her belongings. He approached her hesitantly, his usual stern demeanor softened by something akin to respect. "Ms. Bondi," he said, "you've shown remarkable skill and determination throughout this trial. I underestimated you, and for that, I apologize." Pam looked at him, surprised but gracious. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means a lot." Roberts nodded. "If you ever need guidance or mentorship in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. Talent like yours shouldn't go unrecognized." It was a rare offer, one that Pam accepted humbly. "I appreciate that, Your Honor. Thank you." As she walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and media, Pam reflected on how far she'd come. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and outright hostility, but she had persevered. And in doing so, she had proven that justice could prevail, even against overwhelming odds. Though the trial was over, Pam knew her journey was just beginning. The lessons she had learned, the challenges she had overcome, and the connections she had forged would shape her path forward. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it head-on. The days following the trial verdict were a whirlwind for Pam Bondi. Reporters camped outside her office, eager to capture her reaction to the landmark decision. Social media buzzed with praise for the young lawyer who had taken on one of the biggest corporate scandals in recent memory, and won. Yet despite the attention, Pam remained grounded, focusing on what truly mattered: the lives she had helped protect and the principles she had fought to uphold. Laura was by her side through it all, helping deflect unwanted interviews and keeping things running smoothly at the firm. "You're famous now," Laura joked one afternoon as they sorted through stacks of congratulatory emails. "What's next? A movie deal?" Pam laughed, shaking her head. "I don't need fame. I just want to keep doing my job, helping people who can't fight for themselves." Still, the aftermath of the trial brought unexpected opportunities. Local news outlets featured stories about Pam's rise from a small-town lawyer to a legal prodigy. Even national networks picked up the story, highlighting how she had outmaneuvered seasoned attorneys and earned the respect of Judge Roberts, a man known for being notoriously difficult. People began calling her office, asking if she could take on their cases, many of which involved similar allegations of corporate misconduct. Amid the chaos, Pam received an invitation that caught her off guard. It was a handwritten note from Judge Roberts, delivered to her office late one evening. "Ms. Bondi," it read, "your performance in my courtroom has left a lasting impression. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss the possibility of clerking for me in the near future. Please consider this an open offer." Pam stared at the note for a long time, her heart racing. Clerking for a judge of Robert's stature would be a career-defining opportunity, one most lawyers dreamed of but few achieved. Yet she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to leave behind the work she loved, the cases that allowed her to make a tangible difference in people's lives. She shared the letter with Laura, who immediately urged her to accept. "This could change everything for you," Laura exclaimed. "You'd learn so much working directly under him. Plus, think about the doors it would open." "I know," Pam replied thoughtfully, "but part of me feels like I should stay where I am, for now at least. These smaller cases, they matter. They're important." Laura nodded, understanding Pam's hesitation. "You'll figure it out. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Meanwhile, Carl Jensen faced fallout from the trial. His reputation, once untouchable, had taken a hit after the embarrassing loss. Rumors circulated about his inability to handle Pam's unconventional strategies, and some even questioned whether he had deliberately concealed evidence during discovery. Though no formal charges were filed against him, the scandal tarnished his standing within the legal community. Jensen tried to downplay the defeat in interviews, insisting that the case had been an anomaly, but deep down he knew better. He had underestimated Pam's intelligence and determination, and it had cost him dearly. As he watched her rise to prominence, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret, not because he had lost, but because he had failed to recognize her potential when it mattered most. For Pam, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such a high-profile victory. She continued taking on challenging cases, each one fueling her passion for justice. Her clients appreciated her dedication, often remarking on how she treated them with kindness and respect, qualities that set her apart from other attorneys. One evening, weeks after the trial ended, Pam found herself reflecting on the journey. She sat alone in her apartment, a cup of tea steaming on the table in front of her. The city lights twinkled outside her window, casting a soft glow across the room. She thought about the obstacles she had overcome, the moments of doubt that had threatened to derail her, and the unwavering support of friends like Laura who had stood by her side. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Judge Roberts. "Ms. Bondi, I hope you've had time to consider my offer. Let me know if you'd like to discuss further." Pam smiled faintly, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. She typed out a reply. "Thank you again for the opportunity, Your Honor. I'd love to talk more about it." They met a few days later at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Roberts arrived dressed casually, a rarity for someone usually seen in formal robes, and greeted Pam warmly. Over coffee, they discussed the intricacies of judicial clerkships, the responsibilities involved, and the impact it could have on her career. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," Roberts admitted at one point, surprising Pam. "Not afraid to challenge authority, willing to fight for what's right even when the odds are stacked against you." "I don't know if I'm quite like you, Your Honor," Pam said modestly, "but I do believe in justice. That's why I became a lawyer." Roberts chuckled softly. "Well, whatever your reasons, you've proven yourself capable of great things. If you choose to clerk for me, I'll expect nothing less than excellence. But I think you're up to the task." Pam left the meeting feeling inspired. For the first time, she considered the possibility of stepping into a new role, one that would allow her to shape the law from a different perspective. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Clerking for a judge required long hours and meticulous attention to detail, but she also recognized the value of learning from someone as experienced as Roberts. In the end, Pam decided to accept the offer, though she made it clear that she wanted to maintain a connection to her roots. "I'll take the position," she told Robert, "but only if I can still take on pro bono cases occasionally. There are people who need help, and I don't want to lose sight of that." Roberts agreed without hesitation. "Fair enough. Balance is important. Just promise me you won't burn yourself out." As Pam prepared for her new role, she reflected on how far she had come since those early days of poring over textbooks in her tiny apartment. She had faced ridicule, endured sleepless nights, and weathered countless challenges, all while staying true to her values. And though the road ahead promised its own share of difficulties, she felt confident in her ability to navigate them. On her last day at the firm before starting her clerkship, Laura threw a small party in Pam's honor. Balloons decorated the office, and a cake with the words, "Congratulations, legal prodigy," sat proudly on the conference table. Everyone gathered around, sharing stories and offering well wishes. "You're going to crush it, Pam," Laura said, raising a glass. "Just remember to visit us sometimes, okay?" "I will," Pam promised, smiling. "This place will always feel like home." As she drove home that night, Pam realized that her journey wasn't just about personal success. It was about making a difference. Every case she took on, every person she helped, and every injustice she fought against contributed to something larger than herself. And though the world might see her as a rising star in the legal field, she would always view herself as simply a lawyer committed to doing the right thing. Somewhere in the distance, Judge Roberts watched the news coverage of Pam's achievements, a hint of pride flickering across his face. He had started out skeptical of her abilities, dismissing her as inexperienced and untested. But now, he saw her for what she truly was. A force to be reckoned with, a champion of justice, and a reminder that even the most unlikely individuals could achieve greatness. And as Pam looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. The fight for justice never truly ended. There would always be battles to win, voices to amplify, and wrongs to right. But with determination, resilience, and a little bit of faith, she was ready to face whatever came next.